Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis channel. Hey, listen, if you see clients for a living or want to see clients for a living, I have a tip for you that's going to make your life a hell of a lot easier. It's about the very worst traits that you can find in a potential client. It's about the client, the type of client that I avoid at all costs. It's the entitled client. If there's anything I scan for in terms of taking a client on, or more accurately, choosing not to take a client on, it's if I can sense any entitlement from that particular client. Trust me, they are way more hassle than they are worth. Let me give you an example. So last Saturday night at like 12:30 at night, a guy who I've never met, who I have no relationship to, called my cell phone and he left a message about how he needed my help and was struggling and suffering and so on and so forth. A pretty long, ranty type message on the phone. Now, that's the first kind of red flag because it's when you call someone at 12:30 at night on a Saturday, that's usually indicative of a person who doesn't really take other people's lives into account, right? It's typical for people who perhaps view other people as just tools and who are narcissistic and completely self-absorbed. You could argue, well, perhaps it's a person who's in a complete acute crisis. Yeah, can be, but in most instances, it's not. And then throughout the night, SMSs keep ticking in. And the first SMS that kept ticking in was, yeah, I've been suffering for PTSD for 8 years. Blah, blah, blah. A lot of rants, a lot of stories, just these SMSs ticking in throughout the night. So it's not an acute thing. This is a guy who's been uh, doing this for a very long time. Now, of course, I didn't respond to any of these messages. The day after, he sent me a couple of more messages, and then early in the night, this is on a Sunday, he calls again, and I don't answer the phone because it's Sunday. I don't have a relationship to this person. And he leaves another message on the answering machine, going, kind of hissing with this aggressive, "Call me back, I need help." This entitled, "I'm entitled to your time. I'm entitled to your energy." So I just blocked his number and never called him back. In the beginning of my career, I probably would have called him back. I would have been perhaps duped into the idea of, well, this might be a person who's really suffering and who really needs help and he's desperate, and how can you turn someone like that down? But here's something I've learned over the last 25 years. There's no there's no correlation between people acting like that and necessarily suffering a lot. I've worked with a lot of people who have been suffering tremendously psychologically. People who have been suicidal, people who have had serious suicide attempts, for example. The vast majority of them don't act like this. They're still considerate, they're still decent. Uh, a lot of people who are really struggling don't act like entitled narcissists. The people who scream the most and who create the most drama, uh, it doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the willingness to change, the sincerity. It usually tells you about the level of entitlement. Now, can I claim to know 100% how this person would have responded if I had taken them on? No, I can't. I might always be wrong. So keep that in mind. but I've had a lot of experience with people who think that way, who have that sense of entitlement. And I can say to you, based upon experience, that that type of client, if you take them on, are the most likely client to then no-show. Let's say you give them an appointment 2 days later, they don't even show up for it. Or who want to cancel at the last minute because they just want to do something different, or who won't pay you. They're the first people to flake, cancel, not show up, and any of that sort of stuff. So one of my great tips to you, in terms of knowing who not to work with, are people who show entitlement. Strong sense of entitlement, just exit stage left. Now, let me be very specific here. When I talk about entitlement, I'm not talking about someone who has a sense of entitlement to their own life and their own time and their own resources, who say, look, I'm going to live life on my terms and do what I find meaningful. That's healthy. I'm talking about people with poor boundaries who see other people as tools, who have a sense of entitlement on behalf of other people and the world, as in, you owe me. And when I look back at the clients I have seen who have been way more of a hassle than they have been worth seeing, this tendency towards entitlement has always been there. It's a tip-off for narcissism. And it's kind of easy to get duped by this, because not all people who are very narcissistic in their personality tendencies, not all people with strong narcissistic tendencies are necessarily what's called the classic narcissist. The kind of bold, extroverted, bravado, outgoing, bragging, look at me, type narcissist that we kind of usually associate with someone being narcissistic. The grandiosity, the superficial charm, the yeah, you know what I mean. You've seen these types. What you can get these people for change work as well, but what you can often more get in change work is the kind of more what's called covert narcissistic folks. And the tricky thing about these folks is that they very often present as kind of sullen and downtrodden and kind of depressed and gloomy. And there's this constant victimhood, this victimhood narrative of how they've never been given their shot or their chance, and there's often despite how they can, feel almost a bit fragile, there's this sense of grandiosity there of they're really brilliant, but no one's acknowledged it. Or if only they would have been given their chance. If only people could see how talented they are or how good they are. And the world owes them, and other people owes them. And it's this sullen, depressive victimhood, passive aggressive type way of being. And they always have a free pass for their own behaviors. They're not really accountable because they are always the victim and they're always being victimized. There's usually a hypersensitivity, like an extreme hypersensitivity towards anything that can be perceived as a critique or challenging the way they think, or anything that can be perceived as a slight or disrespectful. they'll often be hypersensitive and respond with rage. And it's kind of tricky because this is more like a personality style. It's kind of like a personality pattern that seems to be very ingrained in these people, and it doesn't seem like these people really change. Like if you take them on as clients, you may be able to help them to some extent, but that covert narcissistic pattern is still going to be there, and no matter what you do for them, it's never going to be enough. It's always going to be this entitled, this sense of entitlement. And especially if you have a way of working that's kind of results oriented or solution focused, uh, taking on people like this can be quite a risk because in a sense, what they're saying is, help me change, but don't you dare challenge how I think. Because if you do, their hypersensitivity is going to kick in, and they're going to get rageful and vindictive. And these are usually the people who then might do their best to just ruin your reputation afterwards and to get really, really vindictive. And I have to say, I've never had a problem with a male client ever. Of course, I've had male clients who I haven't gotten anywhere with and who are dissatisfied with the work and don't think I've helped them in any way. But I've never had a these people who kind of lose it, who write you nasty letters or go on social media or complain to the government or these sorts of things. It's always been women. It's always been women with covert narcissistic tendencies. Now, before I come off as too sexist here, I want to make the case that the vast majority of females that I work with are great to work with. So this isn't true for most women most of the time. I'm just saying that in the instances where it's been a problem, it's always been a woman with covert narcissistic tendencies. And they get back at you by trying to ruin their reputation because you challenge their victimhood narrative. And that can be a huge problem. So, and again, the trick is that they come off as depressives. And compared to, call it, regular people who just depress, you can help those with that. But this pattern, this kind of personality pattern, it doesn't seem to change. I'm not very optimistic that people who have those personality tendencies are very likely to change much at all, right? So I had another fun one. This was a guy, and I have no idea whether he has these kind of covert or more overt narcissistic tendencies, but I booked him in for a session. He also had like a sense of urgency. I really need to work with you and this and that. And I booked him. And on the day he was supposed to meet me on Skype, no show. Doesn't show up. So I call him, doesn't pick up his phone. I send him an SMS where I say, look, it's Jürgen Rasmussen. I have you here in my calendar. Call me back as soon as possible. And I get an SMS back. Oh, I kind of forgot. Can we just do this another day? Right? That's kind of it's a very immature, very irresponsible, kind of entitled, I don't have to live up to commitments, like out of sight, out of mind. And I wrote back, no, we can't. I have as a minimum requirement that people show up for their appointments, and if they don't, that they let me know in beforehand. That's just common decency that I expect of any client. And he says, okay, But it would be a good idea if you could send people a reminder the night before. You know? So this is a person who's not willing to be an adult. Um, I highly recommend reading up on, I'm not a fan of psychiatry at all, as you guys know. And I don't view this as a disease or an illness. It's more like a personality pattern. But I really recommend reading up on these kind of cluster B personality disorders, like narcissism and antisocial personality disorder and borderline. There's some useful information there in terms of patterns of thoughts, and specifically to read up on covert narcissism. If you can avoid those clients, I think as long as you act ethically yourself, I think you can avoid, pretty much any hassle you could ever have with a client. And of course, it can be hard to kind of pick up on these patterns on the phone or beforehand. But the biggest tip off is that sense of entitlement. So at least for me, if I sense any entitlement from a potential client, it's exit stage left. A good resource on narcissism is the book Don't You Know Who I Am by Dr. Romani, I'm going to butcher this last name, Durvasula. So just punch in Dr. Romani on Amazon and you'll find the book. That's a pretty good realistic book on narcissism. Anyways, if you like the way I think and if you're looking to make some changes in your life, know that I see clients from all over the world on Skype. You can reach me at provocativehypnosis.com. I'm also doing a seminar, an online seminar, March 19th and 20th. If you want to check that out, go to the seminar page on provocativehypnosis.com. And of course, I do mentoring. So if any of these things are of interest to you, go to provocativehypnosis.com. Once again, thanks for listening.